Thanks for tuning into the Just Go Play podcast, where we look to develop and promote a positive youth sports experience. As always, we are available for speaking and private engagements and can be reached at info@justgoplay.ca. You can also catch full video versions of our podcast on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to visit us at justgoplay.ca. Enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Just Go Play podcast. I'm here with my hosts, Matt and Elisa. How you guys doing today?
Good man. Good man.
Matt, you good?
I'm good, Daryl. How are you?
You ready for this episode?
I am. What are we talking about today? What's in the mailbag?
Well, I've been getting lots of questions about the 5C's we were referring to in our last episode. And can we break it down for them and how to use them? What's these 5C's and can you break it down a little bit further than just, at a surface level? Can you go into a little more detail on the 5C's for us?
Is that what we're going to launch in today?
We're going to launch into that first. And then we've been getting a lot of, personally, we've been getting a lot of people talking about The Last Dance with Michael Jordan.
Ooh.
We're going to see how we can connect the 5C's, quality sport coaching, all that, and see how that played out in Jordan. We're going to see how we can draw parallels with what Jordan went through and the Bulls to what we've been talking about.
Living lab on the biggest stage.
On the
Perfect
biggest
example.
stage. Yeah. So everyone's watching, everyone's listening, everyone knows a little bit about what happened with Jordan. If you don't know who Jordan is, you're not from this planet. So let's start with the 5C's. We'll start you off, Matt.
Yeah. Okay. So the 5C's are basically how to describe athlete development. They were designed and named by Dr. Wade Gilbert from Fresno State University and released in the United States quality coaching framework that was revamped in June of 2018. So the reason why that was created, the quality coaching framework that was revamped, was because there was too much emphasis on just the competence. So when we talk about the 5C's, we're talking, we're talking about the competence, the confidence, the character, the connection, and the culture. Now, we added culture, and we'll explain why we added culture in a second. But essentially, when we're talking about competence of an athlete, we're talking about the young men and women's physical and technical tactical skills. And that seems to be one of the things that we concentrate on the most because that's what we know the most. And so we hammer the hell out of the competence and we keep driving physical and technical tactical. We got to dribble better. We got these exercises. We can run faster. We can jump higher. We can do all those things. And we really hammer that. And as we can see, if we break down the 5 spheres into 100% athlete development, just from a strictly optics and simplicity sake, you can see each one of those spheres is worth 20%. So 20% of the full 100% athlete. If we look at the competence and our focus is only on the technical, tactical, and physical skills and not things like rest, recovery, rehab, and prehab, or nutrition, or hydration, or some of those other factors, we can see we're only delivering 8%. So when we actually quantify it this way and we look at the level and percentages that we're currently and traditionally focused on, it's a very small percentage of athlete development. And that's what pains the three of us, is when we hear things like, in words like athlete development, being thrown around without baselining. We talked about that. Without assessment, we talked about that last time. Without due consideration to the other factors, which are the confidence, which is the mental psychological, the character, which is the mental leadership, and the connection, which is the social emotional, and then the culture, which, if there's not a culture, which Elisa always talked about, of what athlete development is, if we're not actually going to be beholden to a positive sport culture, then we're not ever going to see connection, character, and confidence, or even competence, because what we're using to measure athlete development is the standings, the schedule, and the score. So that's where it comes from. And in the Canadian model, we've got the Canadian Athlete Development Matrix. They call it a little bit different. The terminology, it's the social emotional, it's the mental psychological connection, a little bit more academia focused. I really like what Dr. Wade Gilbert has done in the United States, USOPC has done, because they've made it common language. So character, connection, and the 4C's is really a nice way of packaging that. And again, we've added culture. So I think we start there. And the important thing to realize is that when we're talking about coaching and quality coaching, the word coaching is derived from stagecoach. Cody Royal mentioned this on one of his podcasts with Fergus. And really, when you look at stagecoach, what was the primary purpose of the stagecoach? It was to move someone from where they were to where they needed to be. So that's what we're talking about in coaching. So I really like that terminology because it breaks it down for our coaches to move someone from where they are to where they need to be. And we can't do that if we're just focused on the physical and the technical, tactical elements. We need to really incorporate those other character, connection, confidence elements too. So that's how I would describe it. Am I missing anything, Elisa, Daryl? Anything else before we kind of move on to continue this conversation around that?
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. No, I like it's such a nice, tidy way to look at, and I'd argue, I mean, we always talk about the sport aspect. We also talk about how sport translates to life. Those 5 C's translate to human development. I don't care if you're working with a child, an adult, an older adult, a senior, whatever age group you're working with, whatever stage, whatever setting, sport, business, school, home life, personal goal reaching, all those 5 hit every single mark you need to address. So how do you address this in a sports setting? How do you address this in a business setting? How do you address this in a personal setting? I think is something that we all need to always focus on and think about, how do I develop my confidence on the field, at home, in the office? How do I develop my character? How do I develop those connections with the people that I'm working with? And again, like, I know we're going to touch on this. I love this series about the Bulls. And I remember being a kid and watching these guys grow up, and I didn't understand all these aspects. So now watching it later on, I'm starting to put some of those pieces together, say like, these are some of the aspects that these guys had, and they had to develop and they had to grind out to be able to get to where they are today. And without, like you talked about, that 20% for each one, if all we focus on is the competence side, which we talked about the assessment, if we're only focusing on assessing the physical, we're missing so 80% of this other rest of the circle. We're missing out on. How much of that is confidence? How much of that is character? When Pippen, we talked about, when Pippen sat out and he's like, I'm not going to go in because you're not going to give me the ball. What does that relate to with character? And then the connection, the team afterwards saying, who was it who got up and cried?
All right.
Cartwright. Yeah,
Oh man, and like that gelled the team. It sounds like from their experience, right? We're taking this third hand, but it sounds like that. Like, what did that do for their connection going forwards? Even though Pippen said he'd do it again, but still. And then Jordan, that's his character. His character was, love him or hate him, he was a strong, dominant leader, but he had the best intentions. He shook everybody's hand. He walked around the dressing room and shook everybody's hand. Doesn't matter if you were driving a golf cart on a security patrol or you were, Pippen, ready to always give him the ball. He shook everybody's hand. What character is that from this guy you say is a jackass in some settings because he wants to win so badly? So if you can break down and analyze with the 5 C's, everybody's composure in the character connection, culture, the culture of that team, it's such a synergistic thing. And I think we need to look at that more so in all our sports aspects and our business aspects and our personal and our life aspects. So I just wanted to add that piece of, this isn't just athlete development. How does this extend to life development beyond?
And I think I want to add to that. I don't think the Bulls are the team of the 90s without this all coming together, these 5 C's. It wasn't until Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan figured out that they needed to work as a group together and bring all these things together for them to be successful. Prior to Phil Jackson coming there or just being an assistant, they were winning. They were winning, but they couldn't take it to the next level. Michael Jordan couldn't do it by himself. They didn't have a culture. There wasn't a connection with the team. The characters weren't there. So I really think it is a great example of all 5 C's coming together in the perfect storm for these guys, because they, other than Michael Jordan, they weren't special guys. They weren't all special. And some people will argue that Pippen was one of the best in the league, but they weren't. Like, this could have been a train wreck. Like, if Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan didn't lead these guys, this could have been a train wreck. And I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but the 5 C's, you couldn't see a better example of them running it than with the Bulls.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a living lab for the 5C's. And, you look at teams, successful teams like the Bulls, the Patriots, the San Antonio Spurs, teams that have that chemistry and that formula for success. And you always hear about the character and about the talking about the character and how to manage the different characters and how to manage the connections, like you guys have said. Daryl, so one of the questions that I know we always get when we have these conversations is, why do you think that coaches in particular, or organizations, only focus on the competence, if they focus on anything at all? Why is it always the physical, the technical, tactical, and Elisa too? So Daryl, first, why do you think that that's all that is focused on, and we don't dive into the connection and the character and the culture and the confidence aspects?
The simple, honest answer, Matt, is because that's all they know. And I know that sounds too easy of an answer, but that's what they know. They know that best. The going into the connection and the character, that's way more work. That's a next level. That's not just focusing on wins. Where with the competence piece, they know the tactical stuff. It's like, listen, I got to make sure they know this stuff. If they know this stuff, they're going to win. And that it goes back to winning, I believe, that they want to, instead of develop teams, they want to just pick a team and win. Because in a lot of the cases, coaches are now getting judged by their records. So you need guys that are competent right away in their mind. Instead of looking to build these guys, they're looking to just take guys that are already, they feel complete, and just let's go. I just want to blow the whistle and send them off and let them go. Now, building a team and buying a team are two different things. Now, I'm going into some deep waters here. I don't want to muddy the waters, but it takes work. You gotta really think about developing a group of guys and caring about a group of people to do this. And that's why a lot of coaches, if they're just there for the W's and not caring about the individual and where they are now and where they want to be, as you talked about the coach and staging things, they just want to win. They don't care where that guy is. They don't care if he gets there. But this is where it becomes challenging, and then it separates a quality coach from a coach that just wants to win. Because a quality coach is going to take this seriously and look at all 5 of these things and say, how can I be better? How can I use these things to build the best team, bring my lower guys up, keep my high guys up, and keep them as leaders? How can I utilize everybody's character and bring it together so we're one unit? That's not happening, or at least it's not happening on a huge basis.
It's the exception, it's not the norm.
Exactly. So that's why I think this is not happening, because this is a lot of work. Initially, at least, it might appear like a lot of work initially, but if you do this work, the foundation, then the house is going to be solid. I don't know if you got anything to add to that.
Oh yeah, strong body, strong mind.
Plenty.
Like you need it. I mean, you guys all know this. Like all of us here, all the people we connect with, so many people we know, they're developing their mind along with their body. So if all you're doing is judging the body and assessing the body, then you're missing a huge component of what controls the body. So how do you address somebody's mind, whatever you want to call it, soul, character, their inner drive, their motivation, all those factors, all of that drives the muscles. And so if you don't have that in tune, how on earth do you think you're going to get those muscles and those joints and that decision making to do what you want on a team? So I have a few reasons for why I think this hasn't happened. Number one, it's easy to measure things like bench press, squats, 30-meter dive. Like it's easy to measure these things. So that's number one, it's easy. Number two, it's sexy. I want to know how much you can lift. It's very visual. It's very, I can lift more than you can. Yeah. How do you, I'm more confident than you. How do I measure that? You can't make that sexy. You can't do that. When I'm up there and I'm bench pressing and I can drop the weights and I'm roaring away, that's great. That makes for great entertainment, which don't forget, sports, especially pro sports, is entertainment. So we watch the drafts the combines every year because it's interesting. I'm not going to watch a combine of a bunch of people sitting around talking about their feelings. You're just not. Now, also, we didn't used to talk about anything to do with the mental, social, emotional. That was, soft, warm and fuzzy. We didn't go there. The sports psychology realm now is so much bigger and so much more accepted. So I think there was a lot of stigma back in the day around talking about it. You don't talk about those things. You just get in there and you grind. And there was that mentality of whatever it came from around just going there and work hard and just put your head down. And we didn't talk about those things. Now we can talk about it more. And you see a lot of these teams bringing in sports psychologists and working with them and understanding the mental preparation side is so significant to the physical delivery. So that's another thing is I think the stigma is we're starting to reduce it. It didn't used to be there. And then the other part is people didn't think it mattered. Like I really don't think that they thought it mattered. So we weren't trained in it. And if we weren't trained in it, we've talked about this in all of our podcasts, you're not trained, you're not confident, you're not going to deliver it. So whether it's assessment or mental skills coaching, we're just not going to deliver it. So now we're starting to see more coaches trained in understanding. And one of my favorite examples was John Herdman. He came in to coach the women's soccer team after that devastating loss. And one of the things he said, he's like, there's 4 pillars of things that I can address with these guys. The physical side is not something I'm going to address right now. They're coming in off something horrendous. I need to address the social, emotional, and the connection to their team. And whether it's women's sport or men's, same thing happened when Team Canada men's, I think it was the 8 boat. What was that guy's name? He wrote a book. Oh, super guy. I'll remember his name. He wrote a book about this crushing loss that they had rowing and how they came back from that crushing loss on a world stage. They had all these expectations to now rebounding. Martial arts, you see it all the time. The mental game is, I've had coaches say, it's mental 95%. 5% is physical production. So
Mr. Miyagi.
Pardon me?
Danielson, Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah, 100%. So we didn't connect the value. It was warm and fuzzy. There was stigma around it. We're not trained to deliver it. So now you're starting to see that shift and you're starting to see the results. It's still hard and it's not as sexy to deliver, but we're seeing the value.
Yeah, I want to just jump in on the trained on it aspect, because I'll tell you, when people ask the question, well, why is this such a big focus now? The competence, the character, and the connection. It didn't seem to be a big focus then, and we seem to be doing a lot better in sport. So people always ask, so this whole training thing, and I think you bring up a good point, because what people used to be trained on was getting a wooden spoon in the back of the head if they didn't exemplify good character. What people used to be trained on was being held accountable to actions that weren't part of weren't acceptable in school or do anything else. So as that shifted and eroded, you saw a lot of people coming, and a lot of young athletes, young men and women coming into the sports system without that, I'm going to call it organic training on how on those character, connection, competence. I mean, you look at the communities back in the day, it was all about coming together and you helped out, whether it was community Bs or whatever the case may be. Now everyone's kind of separated and pulled apart into their own environments. They're on their own social media, they're doing their own thing. So I think part of that training and the need for that training, and you're right, Elisa, a lot of Div 1 schools have doubled and tripled their sports psychologists because of the lack of resilience that is now showing up in sport, and the realization of how important that was. So when people always say to us, well, come on, is this really needed? I mean, look at how all the things used to be. Yeah, but that was an environment that really took care of itself in terms of training those things like competence, character, connection, because that was part of the community, it was part of households, it was an expectation in schools. People were able to help hold you to a higher standard. As we flattened that accountability, and we've talked about this before in terms of the overall resilience, because we're not challenging people anymore, and without challenge there's no adversity, and when there's no adversity there's no authentic victory, they're all contrived. I think that's one of the things that we have to understand. is when you put on the iPhones and you have this whole new digital society that we live in, and it is what it is. There isn't that. I guess what I'm saying is there's not that organic accountability and emphasis on being a good human being as there was back in the old days, and we seem to be losing that. What do you guys think about that as one of the indicators for why we need to resurrect this confidence, competence, and character in such a intentional and prescriptive way?
I agree with
Elisa, ladies first this time.
Sorry, go ahead.
Not you. You're not a lady. Lisa, ladies first this time.
You can be lady next time. Yeah, 100%. You know what, Matt? You touched on something really, really important. Angela Duckworth talks about this with grit. Our generations are getting softer. Like, you slice it any way you want. You talk to anyone who hires kids nowadays. I was just having this conversation with somebody. The drive, the motivation, the confidence, the resiliency, you said it, it's in the basement. So we know it used to be when you were growing up, you got a job at a young age. Life was hard. Ask these kids. I was reading an article this weekend, and it was successful qualities from entrepreneurs that they went through when they were children. And one of the things was they went through some sort of struggle. And you ask a lot of these kids now, I'm not saying kids aren't struggling. They're struggling a heck of a lot. It's a different kind of struggle. And it's a very personal struggle. You know, their emotional connection with their friends or their social groups or the social media that they have, that struggle is very real and still there. It's a different kind of struggle about, I need to put food on the table and I'm 16 years old. I have to go and build my own house in the prairies in a community that doesn't exist yet. Like, that's a very different struggle, and it built a lot of character, I think, in the ways then. We still have that kind of struggle now. It's very, very different. And so the mental side, you're absolutely right, Matt. I think when you talk about, we need to develop it now differently, because back then we had some things that were organic in our life that helped us develop those harder qualities around mental perseverance, around emotional grit, around that resiliency, whereas now we're seeing that being eroded. And it just doesn't exist with a lot of the kids coming up and the teenagers and the young adults that are there. They're crumbling. And we're seeing it in rates of health crisis, mental health crisis, and a physical, like their physical well-being as well. We're seeing that drop. And when you talk to kids about that, when you start delving into their psyche, you're seeing that's where the root of it is. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, totally agree. Daryl, anything to add to that?
100%. These kids are, and I don't like to say soft, because if I'm
soft.
If I say my kid is soft, well, I'm part of the reason he's soft, because I've done too much for him. Or, I don't want to say I've done too much for him, but I think because our generation, or let's call it back in the day, we saw so much adversity, or saw more adversity. Our whole thing was, we don't want our kids to go through what we went through. We don't want our kids to have to suffer and worry about these other things. I just want my kid to worry about school. That's it. I don't want him to feel, I make sure his equipment's there, everything's ready. But we're sort of doing some damage to our own kids, because if we relate it back to the Bulls, each one of those guys on that team had huge adversity, with parents dying, getting killed, didn't make teams as a kid, had to come back and try and make a team, so they all had a lot of adversity. The real hero in this, and I'm going to talk more about this, is Phil Jackson. But he took all this adversity that these guys had and figured out a way how to use it to, our last dance. Like, come on, let's come together. Let's share and enjoy each other. It's going to be hard. We're going to have, we might lose, but he did all those things. Our kids, I think, as Lee said, things have been too laid out for them. We're like parachute parents. The kids know that, if things go sideways, it's going to call dad or mom. I didn't have a parachute when I was growing up. I had lots of adversity. I had guys yell at me, and my mom and dad wasn't there to say, Why are you yelling at my kid? Didn't have that. Why you want my kid? I had to deal with stuff myself. Kids don't deal with these things, these issues themselves now. And that's my own little 2 cents I wanted to add to Elisa, what she's saying. And you could call them soft. We're like their lawyers. We step in. Hey, it's my client. Talk to me. Don't talk to him like that. I don't know if you see any truth in that, Matt.
Yes.
But we've done it. And I can't be mad when I jokingly tell my kids all the time, you guys are soft. If anything goes sideways, I'm going to survive, not you guys. And they laugh because they go, Daryl, Dad, you're with those old man stories again, right? But I technically know I am going to be the last survivor if anything goes sideways with these guys. Anyway, that's my piece. But you can see how these guys, going back, relating it again back to the Bulls, is we got a bunch of, I don't want to call them misfits, but we had a bunch of guys that had to deal with a lot of adversity early in their life. So dealing with adversity at this level was nothing. It was nothing. They were used to it. And they had a coach that figured out, all right, I'm going to work with Mike with that type of leadership. I'm going to, he kept the parameters the way he wanted. Mike, Jordan, and Jackson, they basically ran that. There was no help from the organization. Those two guys managed that team. Mike was like a player coach. That's what he was, player coach. Anyway, add to that or tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you made some really good points. And, you look at all the great coaches that have been profiled, especially in Wade's book, Coaching Better Every Season, where he and his team went out and studied the great coaches like Phil Jackson, like Wooden, like Popovich, like Pat Summits, the Orimo, and said, what are the commonalities here? And the commonalities were developing the whole human, as Elisa likes to call it. It's human development first, or player development first, or people development first, people before player. And I think that's one thing that gets away, and that's what the 5C's really helps anchor and remind us, that we have to be paying attention to all of these other things. And, what kind of things go into, a connection? Is that are we having fun playing? Relationships with teammates, understanding performance, nutrition, sickness and fatigue, and doing the right thing. Those are the kind of the qualifiers there. And how do we measure them is a question. Like, how do we measure these things? And two things that we've learned. Number one, these are kind of things that should be self-assessed by the athlete as well as assessed by the coach. And when we're assessing, we're not giving a 1 to 100 grading scale. We're using rubrics. So initial, emerging, competent, proficient, because people should work through a progress. You should be at an initial level to start with, and then emerging, and competent, proficient. And obviously, initial is not really grasping the characteristics of the trait. Emerging, I understand what those things mean, but I don't implement them. Competent, I implement them sporadically. Proficient, okay, now I understand, and I am being intentional about, rolling those things out on a daily basis. When we talked about character in terms of the mental and the psychological leadership, we're talking about things like work ethic, game sense, knowing where to be, attitude, focus, all of those kind of adjectives, and you can make your own. So they're laid out very well, I will say, in the Canadian Athlete Development Matrix, which is available, anywhere. People can just source that. They're laid out, and they give, as a matter of fact, they give 264 different markers for the connection and character and confidence. The confidence is all about self-resilience, belief, trust in training, belief in self. Again, very important to have the athletes look at that and try to gauge where they are, and then the coaches try to gauge where they are. Very important that it's defined and that definition is consistent. So if I have an athlete and I'm asking them about a qualifier in their character, it's not Daryl's definition versus Elisa has another definition versus Matt has another definition. It's defined by my organization. And that's why culture needs to be that fifth piece, because you're either doing it or you're not. It's very black and white. You either believe in this or you don't. There's not really a half and half. You're either running an organization and an association or a team that's with the intention of developing better young men and women for sport and for life, or you're trying to win. It's very clear, and you can walk into any team setting and you can see what that culture is, and if they are serious about looking, engaging these things, you can see it in 10 minutes based on asking, etc. And what the Last Dance has done is it's done a fantastic job of giving a live example that people are familiar with. Just like Elisa said, no one knew what was going on behind the scenes at that time, but now with all of our understanding, we can look at that and say, hey, without knowing, this is what was happening. And some might argue that, Phil Jackson did know. I mean, his wife was a social worker. He implemented a lot of things there. Zen Buddhism, he implemented a lot of things there. And it was all about the process, staying in the process, staying in the moment, being in the moment, and really developing. And understanding that different players had different needs and catering to that. Again, we always talk about what is great leadership. Great leadership isn't telling everyone, hey, come on, follow me, and you turn your back and you march towards the goal. Great leadership is walking backwards towards the goal while you're dealing with people that are in front of you, a little bit there, and you're moving them along at their own path. So they're not coming in linearly. It's not a linear unified process. And that's where I think we make the mistake and do a disservice to young boys and girls, is we always treat them like everything is linear. And that's from that flexed arm hang and phys ed right through to the, you have to do this or else you're not going to be any good. And if you're not, at the gold level by the time you're here, well, then you can forget about playing in a high performance league, or you can forget about being drafted. Like you said, Daryl, half those guys, Steve Kerr didn't even get one scholarship offer and took it right away from Arizona, and then turned out to be not only one of the key players in a dynasty team, but arguably one of the better coaches in the NBA. And what has he done? He's taken all things that he's learned from his parents, father, experience, and coaches, and he's emulated that and with the Golden State Warriors, and lo and behold, I think last time I checked, they had done a pretty good job of having a little dynasty of their own.
You bring up a really good point. A lot of this, what you said, I wanted to touch on, but one of the things you said there at the end is, how interesting is it, and how many times have we seen this in all kinds of sports and in life, where somebody gets passed by because they're not the ones who do, the best on all the things that we measure, which is usually the win column or the physical competence. And then they're the ones that actually perform, especially in a team setting. Individual sports, we could argue back and forth. I think we're focusing on the team setting, and you're seeing it in hockey. The top draft pick, time and time again, is not necessarily the one producing the biggest results season by season. And if you look at some of these kids who are drafted, and they're drafted lower, Steve Kerr is a great example of that. We're talking about The Last Dance. You look at these guys who are drafted lower, and they're picking them for different reasons. Whatever their reason was in Arizona to pick Steve, they're picking them for different reasons, and then they're giving them. And I want to really focus on the 5th C that we're using to differentiate kind of what that addition is. You're adding that person to a culture that's not just holding on to them for their skill set. They're holding on to them for a lot of reasons around their skill set as well. So what kind of character building are they bringing to the team? What kind of connection are they bringing to the team? What kind of confidence do they have that they can bring to each other? For Jordan to say to Steve, hey, be ready, I'm going to give you the ball. For some people, they would crumble, absolutely crumble. They got to take that last minute shot, and everything's riding on them. You see Steve's face, I'll be ready. Like he was ready to go. This is a guy who time and again was passed up, and then he performed. He had that shot down. His confidence to be able to perform under the pressure like that, that's what you would expect to see out of a top draft pick. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you see them choke and fail. And you see these guys who had to grind it out all along the way to have someone give them a little bit of confidence to say like, hey man, I believe in you. I'm going to give you the ball. And they deliver. Where does that come from? It's not just their skill set. That comes from somewhere else. And I think it's a really important thing for us to always bring it back to, is in those moments, what is it that's driving these guys to be at the top level, it's not necessarily their skill set. It's the other things that we're looking at, those other 4C's that we're talking about: the connection, the culture, the character, and the confidence. So I really like what you said, that. And I wanted to make sure that we always look back and reflect. These top draft picks that we're going after, they're not always the ones that are delivering the results in these team settings that we're trying to see going forward. So always think about that, and always think about, well, who outside of that should I be picking and why? Daryl, we got.
I'm continuing with what you're saying. Jordan helped with that culture of excellence. Yeah, Phil, Jackson was there, but Jordan with that competitiveness. Steve Kerr wanted that ball. He didn't want to let Jordan down with the team, and the fact that Phil Jackson basically saying, Jordan, you're going to take this shot, and he's looking over and going, they're all going to come to me. I'm going to give it to you. That confidence, we talk about one of the C's is confidence. When he was so excited, he's like, Jordan's confident in me finishing this game. Like that piece, that theme throughout the Last Dance was Jordan was tough on his guys. And some people would say he was a jerk. But every one of them, if you asked them, would do it again. They would do it again. And that's the piece, and they go on and say things like he wouldn't ask anybody to do anything he wouldn't have done. He said, listen, I'm taking these guys with me, whether they like it or not. And if they don't like it, then they don't have to be here. And that competitiveness, I knew he was competitive. I didn't know how competitive he was, where he made up stories about guys saying things about him just so he can take his game to the next edge. Like he had a list. He kept a list of guys that he wanted to get back at, which was, he was almost possessed, and that motivation worked for him, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen before in terms, like I said, I knew he was good. The other thing I loved about Michael and going back to this was being in the moment. Matt, you're talking about being a leader. That dude, like he was in the moment. Like all the distractions happening, and he showed up every night. There was no nights off for him. And somewhere we gotta look at that leadership, and it's like, wow. We always tell people you gotta be present. You gotta be present. That guy was always present. And to keep going on with the coaching thing, a lot of coaches weren't coached like that. That's why they don't understand the 5C's or why they may not apply. They weren't coached like that. And if you weren't coached like that, it's hard to just pull that out of thin air. You have to be a student of people to want to be a coach like that. And you have to, Phil Jackson was an assistant coach watching. He was an observant coach watching what worked, what didn't work with these guys. And that's the beauty of this story is Phil Jackson grew with these guys. So did Michael Jordan. They grew together, and look what they took, where they took it.
Yeah, and I really want to jump in on your point about leadership and coaching, because you're absolutely right. And Elisa said something at the top of the hour here that resonated with me, that I wrote down, and is that this is not just for coaching in sport. This is applied to life, which begs the question, and we've asked it often: why aren't we teaching leadership skills at an earlier level? These young men and women aren't going to lose by not being taught leadership skills. Like, look at the stuff that we teach in elementary and secondary school that is both redundant and becoming highly irrelevant now that we can Google stuff. But leadership is something that is way, way, way overlooked, in my opinion. And it's something that we should be getting and thinking about getting into the athletes' hands, these young people's hands, early and often, because a leader becomes a player, a teammate, an official, a volunteer coach, a paid coach, a parent, a employee, an employer, a manager, a boss, a CEO. So they aren't, we tend to individualize and silo it off. And, there's books on how to be a great CEO, books on how to be a great manager, no books on how to be a great parent, obviously, books on different things. But what we could benefit from is a standardized leadership course that basically took people through the fundamentals of human development and stressed the importance of it. And I think that is a huge opportunity that's missing. We would have substantially less problems in our, never mind our sports sector, but all of our sectors, if we thought about how to bring that into mainstream.
This would be huge in the workforce. It'd be huge.
Let me ask you guys a question. It's a valuable concept that you're bringing up, Matt, about leadership, and we know how important it is. Do you think that everybody is a leader or has the potential to be a leader?
I sure do.
So everybody that is out there, we look at, say there's 25 kids in a classroom. All of those kids have the potential to be leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And by what are we defining leader? Are we defining manager? Or are we defining leadership in their own right, over their own circle of influence, over their own personal life and circumstance? I mean, it really depends on what the definition, your definition of leader means. But yes, I think leadership can be taught. I think there is leadership that is wired in people's DNAs. I think just like any other profession, there's going to be better leaders than others. I think, but I think all leadership and the best leadership is predicated on the followership. You can't be a great leader if you're not willing to follow. And so by that right, I think everyone has the opportunity to be a leader in their own space. Now, are they all going to be CEOs? No. Are they all going to be great coaches? No. Are they all going to be fantastic parents? And no. But leadership can be exemplified as being a great employee. Leading by example can be exemplified in your peer group. Even if you're not the alpha male or female, you can demonstrate great leadership all the time. And I think that we have reserved it and earmarked it only for the people, which ironically, we only teach them after they've arrived in the leadership position. Then we give them all this, inundate them with books and leadership skills and all of these great things. Why not do that early? Why not do that early and often? And I mean, I think the Bulls is another great example. You had people taking leadership over roles. And so Steve Kerr took leadership over his role, Paxton. Obviously, Dennis Rodman took leadership over his role. Michael Jordan took leadership. Scottie Pippen took leadership. If people didn't take leadership, and we see it all the time in teams and organizations, they don't take leadership over their roles, it doesn't work.
And you know what? People would argue about you saying that Rodman was a leader, right? But on the court, he totally was a leader. Outside, the stuff he did, the monkey business, like that piece to me too was like, how do you manage a guy like this? And every team has guys like this that are like, they're not they don't fall in line. They're, as you said, they're not linear. They follow different rules, and you got to rope these guys in, meet them where they are, and figure out how to rope them back in. Now, some coaches will say you can't have a guy like that on your team, and I'm sure many teams wouldn't have taken Dennis Rodman with all the monkey business, but somehow through leadership, Phil Jackson and Jordan figured out a way to make this work. And that was surprising to me how much of a challenge Rodman was. But his play, when he showed up, he was there to do his, like you said, his role. He was a leader on the court. So I'm not sure where I'm going with this with Rodman, because it's arguably, like, I didn't like him as a person. I loved his game, and it paid off. Like, I would have got rid of that dude, and that's why I'm not a coach in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts? I think a lot of guys would have gotten rid of him.
But I don't think,
like,
a lot
if
of
you
guys
look at nowadays,
have understood him. They wouldn't have understood him.
Yeah.
And
if we look at, like, say we also have to look at.
Go ahead.
We also have to look at, like, the time that this was. They mentioned it kind of near the end there. There was no social media. So Rodman can go off to Vegas, and there wasn't everybody in clubs taking videos of him posting online, and then the media talking about it. Like, we knew of this kind of stuff, but it was so much easier to conceal all of it. Now, and I'll take another current example, John Jones in the UFC. arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest fighters currently fighting, and probably will go down in history as one of the greatest. His outside the ring performance is killing him. Now, if you equated John Jones and Dennis Rodman from today, if they were both competing today or if they were both competing back then, how are they any different? They're the same. He's said now he needs to go out and get absolutely obliterated before a fight, annihilated with alcohol, not with, I don't know, with the lister. He just mentions with alcohol. That's what he needs to do to be able to come in and perform at that highest level. Rodman did the exact same thing. He needed those little mental breaks. Why he got into wrestling, I mean, that was his way of managing other things in his life that were going on. And he said, let me go and do these things, but when I come and I show up on the court, I'm there. And I think we treated it very differently. And Phil and Michael were able to treat it differently then as opposed to now. Now you can't get away with that. And I think the media is one of the reasons that we can't get away. We're always looking at ways we can tear people down. And here's another example of if those guys were in the environment today with all the pressures that they have heightened,
different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Would that team have been able to perform at the same level under this level of scrutiny now? And I mean, we don't know that obviously, but you look at how that team was then and how that team would be in environment now. Environment is a big deal. We've talked about that in a lot of our podcasts, the environment that you're in. It could have changed things dramatically. And Dennis Rodman's a perfect example. Or any of the guys. Like when Pippen missed those free throws, if he got skewered on social media the next day, what would that have done to his confidence? But that wasn't necessarily the case. There was media, but you could turn off the TV and it was gone. Right? Now you don't have.
Yeah, so all of this
now,
really feeds back into the. Yeah, great points, and it all feeds back into the need for a real view and elevation of the confidence, the tools for developing character, confidence, and connection.
So with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So really salient point. So I mean, I think bringing this all back. I mean, and again, we all agreed that the Chicago Bulls were a good living lab for this conversation because confidence, character, and connection. It's not coming out of nowhere. You could actually put the two and two together and see it happen in a real setting. But what we need to do is we really need to see more of the implementation of some of these tools and in these pillars at the grassroots level. We really need to help young coaches, men and women, really emulate and be those examples for the kids that they're coaching, as well as take them through some of the processes, having some of these conversations. I think it was Daryl, people say no time, they don't know how to do it. That's not an excuse anymore, as you know, because you're a big proponent of that. That really is quality coaching. That's what quality coaching really is for the majority. For 98%, it's a dress rehearsal of real life. We've talked about it all the time. The 2% are going to find their way. As a matter of fact, if we get out of their way, the more we get out of the way, the faster they probably find their way. So really, for the 98%, we have to ask ourselves and remind ourselves, and then be intentional with how are we bringing these tools into develop the confidence, develop the competence. What can we do in addition to what we're doing on the ice, on the pitch, inside the diamond? We really have to start upping our ante. And that's why the United States, USOPC, created that quality coach framework to really try to ground the coaches in the United States to what is quality coaching. What does it look like? What doesn't it look like? And the same thing with Canada with the Canadian Athlete Development Matrix, although much, much too complicated.
We're building better people. At the end, the bottom line, we're building better people. And that's what, if people don't understand what you can get from sport, that's what it is right there. You said it, dress rehearsal for life, dealing with people, dealing with culture, dealing with groups, connecting. We close our eyes and we could be talking about the workplace. We could be talking about careers. We could be but all these things come together, and the Bulls, as you said, it was a lab where we saw it all come together, and it wasn't linear. And there was leadership, there was conflict, there was competitiveness. All these things are in life. You know what I mean? There was passion, there was struggle, teammates, having to work with people that you didn't love exactly. Like, it's all life. That all seems like someone's workplace if we really broke it down. And that's what's so great about them dissecting the Bulls like this, and Jordan's legacy. And could they have won another one, with that, if they went back to the drawing board after that year and done it again? We'll never know. But that's a kind of an interesting question, if we're getting towards the end of this and wrapping it up, is what did we learn, and could they have continued this? Phil Jackson.
Are you talking about first steps? Are we getting?
No, you want to get into first steps? We're getting close.
Yep. Let's get into first steps.
All right.
So one thing that I've taken away from, especially watching The Last Dance, and a lot, it's not unusual from a lot of the highlighted coaches or teams. Matt, you mentioned the Patriots earlier. Like, we look at a lot of these teams that have done things that are the unthinkable. Like, these guys had two three-peats. Like, it's unbelievable. So one of the things that I look at is I'm connecting around that 5C, that edition one, is around that culture. Ask outside of your circle of influence. So Phil Jackson brought in some Native American traditions. He brought in that mental training aspect before anyone was really doing it in the same way. We looked at like that militaristic style of coaching, grind them out, put them in line, run these drills. And we looked outside, he looked outside of that. And a lot of the coaches who looked a little bit differently at how to train athletes, how to develop a team, how to be successful, they all want to win. How they do that is what we need to look at. So that culture is something, and it's hard to build culture. So number one, look outside of your circle of influence. Get aspects from things outside of what you're used to. So whether it's ancient wisdom, whether it's new philosophies, whether it's something from the business world and bring it into sport world, bring something else external to what you currently know and ask for that help. Talk to the people who are doing this, dive into it, and then find a way to use that to get the results you want, because you can gain so much by getting that external influence. That's one of my first steps. Daryl?
One of my first steps, and I'm going to, because we could go on forever with first steps, is you have to surround yourself with the right people. You have, if you're a coach and choosing your team, you know what I mean, and looking for all these 5C's, you have to find the right people and help nourish that. So finding the right people would probably be one of the biggest things that I would also take away from the last dance, was he put these guys together and they became the right people, right? They may not have been the right people when they started, but he's the one that put this together and made them the right people. And that's why, for me, in all this, I know Jordan's a star, but Phil Jackson's the real hero for me on this. He put the right people together and helped them take it to the next level. Even though everyone will say Jordan was the bully and whatnot, he knew that. He managed it.
All right. First steps for me are also in Daryl's vein from a coaching, educator, leadership standpoint. So first steps for leaders. Number one is create your season and your expectation and goals on who you want to be, rather than how many games you want to win, because you can control that. So you can control your controllables. We talked about that a lot. You will have a lot more wins if you set up a season and define your season and your group on who you want to be. Number two is understand what quality coaching is and isn't. Quality coaching isn't aggregating, top talent and then whooping inferior competition. That's not quality coaching. Quality coaching is finishing the season better than you started over a agreed upon and prescribed measures or metrics that have been mutually agreed upon with the whole team. Because if you can do that, again, you're going to have a lot more wins, and the outcome becomes a byproduct of what you've created. and you're going to have a lot more happiness, and a lot more buy-in, and that really, really goes a long way into seeding that culture, which, as Elisa said, was the number one priority. And nothing happens without a good culture. Good culture trumps apps. Culture trumps everything any day of the week. So I really want to reinforce that point that Elisa made, and Daryl. I think, the right people, right now, right away. Like you said, and we've said that before. So I think those are great first steps to do. And with that, I will take control and say thank you for tuning in. If you like the podcast, share it. If you've got feedback for us, contact us. We're happy to have these conversations. We do get a lot of good feedback, especially the education. Ooh, that was a hot topic last week. Is PE dead or not? We've got some polarization on the right and on the left. So thanks for the feedback around that. Thanks for the question about, can you dive into the 5C's a lot more, and enjoy the rest of your week, and take the weekend to just go play.
Yeah, man.
Yes.
Well done.
Just go play.